Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for people to filter in and we'll get started in about a minute. Hello, and welcome to the International Symposium on Global Chinese Philanthropy. My name is Emily Baum. I'm an associate professor of history at UC Irvine and director of the Long U.S.-China Institute. And on behalf of the UCLA Asia Pacific Center and the Long U.S.-China Institute, it is my pleasure to kick off this two-day event. This conference has been made possible by the generous support of many different organizations and individuals. The UCLA Asia Pacific Center, which is hosting this event, promotes greater knowledge and understanding of Asia and the Pacific region through innovative research, teaching, public programs, and international collaborations. The Asia Pacific Center also runs the program on Central Asia, the Taiwan Studies Program, and the Hong Kong Studies Program, and is an academic partner of the Global Chinese Philanthropy Initiative. The Long U.S.-China Institute at UC Irvine is the co-organizer of this event, and the Long Institute is dedicated to studying contemporary Chinese society, politics, and culture in its historical, global, and comparative perspectives. The Long Institute supports scholarship and events that facilitate mutual understanding and bilateral engagement between the United States and China. This conference has additionally been made possible by the generous support provided by the Long Family Foundation and the UCLA Asia Pacific Center's Xiangli Chen China and Beyond Forum. We are also grateful for the co-sponsorship provided by our institutional partners, including Huamin Research Center at Rutgers University, the Center for Chinese Entrepreneur Studies at Tsinghua University, the Academy of Overseas Chinese Studies at Jinan University, the Sociology Department at Zhejiang University, the Contemporary China Research Cluster of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong, the Chinese Heritage Center at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and Tundan Cheng Lok Center for Social and Policy Studies at the University Tunku Abdul Rahman in Malaysia. Last but certainly not least, I want to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to the staff members of the Asia Pacific Center, Executive Director Elizabeth Lester, Assistant Director Aaron Miller, and Student Assistant Lauren Nip. They have been working tirelessly over the last few months to put this event together, and we would not have been able to do this without them. So before we start, just a few words on logistics. If you would like to ask a question at any point during this session, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. After the speakers' presentations, we will read the questions on your behalf. So let's get started. To begin this session, Professor Cindy Fan is going to offer some opening remarks. Professor Fan is Vice Provost for International Studies and Global Engagement at UCLA, and she is the first woman and first Asian American to hold that position. She's responsible for UCLA's global strategy, international partnerships, and global engagement, and she works closely with the UCLA Chancellor's Office to strengthen the university's relationships and partnerships with institutions all over the world. She is also a professor of geography at UCLA, and she's known internationally for her research on migration, regional development, and gender in China. So Professor Cindy Fan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. On behalf of UCLA, I'd like to welcome everyone to the International Symposium on Global Chinese Philanthropy. As a land-grant institution, the International Institute at UCLA acknowledges the Gabrielina Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tobanga. And please allow me to also read a brief statement. The UCLA International Institute condemns the violence and hate crimes against Asians, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders. And we join UCLA Chancellor Jean Block in denouncing stereotypes and racial biases of any kind. We are horrified and saddened by the Atlanta area shootings and other attacks in California, New York, and elsewhere. Our hearts go out to those directly or indirectly affected by these attacks, and we urge everyone to join efforts to fight against racism, sexism, and all forms of discrimination. The International Institute at UCLA has 27 interdisciplinary research centers and 8 degree programs. One of them is the Asia Pacific Center, led by one of our most innovative and brilliant professors, Min Zhou, and supported by incredibly gifted staff, Executive Director Elizabeth Lester and Assistant Director Erin Miller. I would like to thank them for their remarkable leadership and for organizing this symposium. I'm also grateful to my good friends, John, Marilyn, and Vivian Long, Professor Archie Kleingartner, founding dean of the UCLA School of Public Affairs, and Stuart Kuo, former executive director of Asian American Advancing Justice. Their vision sparked the beginning of the Global Chinese Philanthropy Initiative, or GCPI. And I'd like to acknowledge the generous support from the Long Family Foundation and the Asia Pacific Center Shen Li Chang China and Beyond Forum that has made this symposium possible. I'm also thankful to Professor Emily Baum, Director of the Long U.S.-China Institute at UC Irvine, for co-organizing the symposium. And also many societal leaders have also made significant contributions to this initiative, including our 2 speakers in this session, Zhenyu Huang, President of the Committee of 100, and philanthropist Shirley Wang, past President of UCLA Foundation. Now, you may ask, what does global Chinese philanthropy mean? Well, I suggest you attend all the sessions of this symposium to find out. But one thing I can share is that a deeper understanding of philanthropists around the world who are of Chinese descent is necessary now more than ever, including what are their visions, why do they give, their sense of social responsibility, and how have they contributed to local and global communities. The COVID-19 global pandemic, climate change, tensions between the US and China, a new wave of anti-Asian violence and hate crimes in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement that calls attention to persistent social injustice and systemic racism are just some examples of difficult and global problems that need solutions. Solutions that are informed, collaborative, and based on science and data. So the positioning of the GCPI as a global, research-oriented, and forward-looking initiative is precisely the kind of strategy that helps disseminate knowledge, cultivate global and local partnerships, build trust, find collective solutions, and improve international relations. I look forward to 2 days of rich presentations and discussions involving experts from 10 countries and regions and 4 continents. Thank you very much to all the presenters and panelists. Congratulations again to Professor Min Zhou and the UCLA Asia Pacific Center. And I wish everyone a successful and productive symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Next in the agenda is the launch of a special issue of the China Nonprofit Review on the topic of promoting research on global Chinese philanthropy. Professor Min Zhou, who edited the special issue, will be giving some remarks on the forum. Professor Zhou is Professor of Sociology and Asian American Studies, and she is the Walter and Shirley Wang Endowed Chair in US-China Relations and Communications at UCLA. She's also the Director of the UCLA Asia Pacific Center. Her main areas of research are in migration and development, children of immigrants, Chinese diasporas, and the sociology of Asia and Asian America, and she has published extremely widely in all of these areas. So Professor Zhou, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Cindy. Before I start, I denounce the senseless killings in the Atlanta region on Tuesday, targeting Asian women. My heart is broken and goes to the families and friends of the victims. Along with my own family, friends, and community, I am appalled, upset, and angry And I'm also feeling disbelief, scared and vulnerable, and finding it hard to stay focused. Systemic racism and anti-Asian hate must stop. Thank you all for your support and standing in solidarity to stop AAPI hate. Thank you all for participating in this two-day international symposium on global Chinese philanthropy. Welcome. I'm here to say a few words about our involvement in the Global Chinese Philanthropy Initiative, or GCPI, as an academic partner, leading to the publication of a special issue in China Nonprofit Review in 2019. Chinese culture has embedded a long tradition of charity and multiple strands of charitable thought. The idea of humaneness and the concern for the well-being of the common people, rooted in Confucianism, have served as keystones to promote the spirit of philanthropy and the act of doing good for a long time in China, the United States, and the greater Chinese diaspora around the world. Patterns are different by region. A recent study finds that among Chinese wealthiest individuals living in different societies outside mainland China, 16% in Hong Kong, 23% in Singapore, and 41% in the United States consider philanthropy as one of their top three spending priorities. There are also striking similarities. Another recent study finds that philanthropy in China and the United States have been on the rise, both in size and quantity, at the turn of the 21st century. In China, for example, the number of registered philanthropic organizations increased by 430% between 2006 and 2016, with charitable donations reaching $16.7 billion US dollars in 2014. In the United States, the number of Chinese American foundations has also increased exponentially by 418% between 2000 and 2014. Both Chinese and Chinese American philanthropy in China and the United States, Chinese and Chinese American philanthropists have also interacting more frequently than ever before through public forums like this to build platforms through which to communicate and share their experiences and best practices. Divergent and convergent patterns of Chinese philanthropy are increasingly visible. However, the causes and impacts of philanthropic development are less known. Global Chinese philanthropy as an area of intellectual inquiry and scholarly research remains under study. It is against this backdrop that GCPI was launched as a multi-phase project to fill the gaps with the support of the Long Family Foundation, Asian American Advancing Justice Los Angeles, and UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs initially, and UCLA Asia Pacific Center since fall of 2016. The GCPI is guided by an executive committee consisted of John Long, a visionary philanthropist, Professor Archie Klein-Gardner, founding dean of the UCLA School of Public Affairs, and Stuart Kuo, former executive director of the Asian American Advancing Justice Los Angeles. Thank you, John, Archie, and Stuart for your leadership, guidance, and support. Focusing on China and the United States, the GCPI project is the first academic effort aiming at 1, scholarly research and knowledge production. 2, dissemination of research findings through convenings and public media outreach to inform best practices, policymaking, and further research. And 3, the development of a philanthropic ecosystem to expand networks and relationships between Chinese American, and diasporic Chinese philanthropies, nonprofit organizations, and academic communities. So far, the GCPI has now completed 2 phases of study. Phase 1 was to conduct a historical overview of the existing literature on global Chinese philanthropy, producing a series of working papers, and to collect data of 68 distinguished philanthropies in China and the US, leading to the GCPI report that analyzed the giving motivations, patterns, contributions of these distinguished philanthropies. Phase 2 was to launch a website and a series of public events, including the GCPI Tsinghua Forum that was held in Beijing in summer 2018. Now we are in phase 3 that focus on research. The journal's special issue came from research papers presented at the 2018 Tsinghua Forum that concluded the second phase of GCPI. This special issue showcases 6 major studies, including a quantitative study to examine what determines donations and who is more likely to donate to what. A study of the new generation of young philanthropists in China, the San Er Dai. A study of diasporic Chinese culture, traditions, ethos, and value systems through the lens of philanthropy, and ethnographic research on the transnational aspect of Chinese philanthropy through the case of diasporic Chinese organizations on hometown development, an archival study of the role of Rockefeller's Foundation on China's agricultural modernization in the 1930s, and lastly, a comparative study of environmental philanthropy in 4 predominantly Chinese societies: mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. These studies presented in the special issue are meant to stimulate and promote further research. In the current phase 3 of GCPI, the UCLA Asia Pacific Center is taking a more proactive role in promoting research. We are in partnership with UC Irvine and 6 other institutions in the US, mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia. They are all co-sponsors of this 2-day international symposium, which will take a multidisciplinary dive into global Chinese philanthropy and promote its development as a scholarly field. Our virtual symposium today and tomorrow will feature presentations by Chinese philanthropists, as well as researchers from the US, East and Southeast Asia, Europe, and Africa. In this opening session, we'll hear a presentation by Zi Huang, President of the Committee 100 on the extraordinary contributions of Chinese Americans to American society, and an interview with celebrated Chinese American philanthropist Shelley Wang. We will then have 4 sessions of research presentations, 1 right after this opening session and 3 tomorrow. We will conclude with a roundtable panel to discuss further research. Thank you for your enthusiastic participation and hope to see you throughout this 2-day conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhou. Now I would like to invite Mr. Zhengyu Huang to deliver our keynote speech. Mr. Huang is president of the Committee of 100, and he is the author of 3 books published in China that have sold over 250,000 copies. He received his BA in Industrial Engineering and Economics from Stanford University, where he also received an MA in Computer Science. He later earned an MBA from Harvard Business School. After graduating from Harvard, Mr. Huang worked at Intel Corporation, where he rose to the rank of managing director. During this time, he also served under President Obama as a White House Fellow and a special assistant to the administrator for the US Agency for International Aid. Thereafter, he started a financial service data firm that grew to 300 staff and 7 offices. He was most recently chairman of an education-focused investment firm. Mr. Huang has lived in 5 countries, including the United States, Germany, Japan, India, and China, and he has traveled to over 80 countries, which is certainly making me very envious right now. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Zhengyu, or Zi, Huang.
Thank you so much, Emily, for the kind introduction. Thank you again, Ming, for inviting me to speak to all of you. And it is my distinct pleasure to share the stage with one of our members Shirley Wang at the Committee of 100. So let me jump into the core of this discussion. I assume someone's going to show the slides. Thank you. As you all know, that today our community, and I think the entire country, is saddened and about what's happening to Asian Americans and the violence and hate that have been showered upon us. And really, it's in that context that about a couple years ago that the Committee of 100 began researching and commissioning a landmark studies on the 175 years of Chinese American contribution to America through all walks of American life. Because as you all know, despite the fact that we've been here for almost 2 centuries, we are still seen as the perpetual foreigner, a stranger in our own homeland. And what we hope to do with this landmark studies is to really show through data, research, and storytelling the contribution of Chinese Americans, and by extension, Asian Americans across all aspects of American life. Next slide, please. All right, so there is a link that is live, a website that has interactive capabilities across 7 sectors through which Chinese Americans have contributed in America, as well as a white paper that's about 146 pages. But trust me, it's actually a fun read with a lot of great pictures, as well as 7 pillar reports that dive deep into the 7 sectors of American society, be it science or technology, public health, national security, infrastructure, etc. So please, after this conversation, please feel free to visit this site, contributingacrossamerica.economist.com. Next slide. Okay, why this study and why now? As you know, because of COVID-19 and because of some of the irresponsible language of our public leaders, last year we saw a significant increase in anti-Chinese and anti-Asian hate and violence. Having the pandemic branded as a China virus or Kung flu, I think has done irreparable damage, not just to Chinese American and Asian Americans, but really to what America stands for. And we believe that it's important to provide a counter narrative, right? While we fight stridently for our rights as Americans in this country, it's also important to show all other Americans that we have been contributing members of this great society. And in fact, what we have contributed benefited not only our community, but all Americans. So next slide. Okay, let's really dive into the Chinese American population. We are about a little bit less than 6 million. About 4 million have American citizenship or on the path of American citizenship. So it's quite a diverse population. In fact, if you look into it more, you find even more diversity, which goes very much counter to the popular myth of the model minority. So while, yes, on average, Chinese Americans have a higher education level, however, 20%, fully 2 out of 10 Chinese Americans have trouble speaking English. Similarly, while the average income of a Chinese American family is above the national average, 10% or 1 out of every 10 Chinese American household makes less than $15,000 a year, right? So this is great disparity and diversity within our community. And as many of you know, this rings true for other next slide. Okay, so how do we contribute? The fact is we have contributed despite the discrimination, despite the challenges. As you all know, the Chinese in America is the only group that has been specifically targeted with an act focusing on one ethnicity. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 basically forbid not just Chinese entering America, but also Chinese living in America to be naturalized as citizens. In fact, an extension of this meant that the Chinese cannot own land, cannot go into many professions such as doctors or lawyers, And it lasted more than 60 years until World War II, when China was fighting on the side of the United States against the Axis. And we have to remember this because the contributions I'm about to describe to you were made despite the discriminations, despite the challenges. And the fact is, today, when you see so many Chinese entrepreneurs, whether one that opened a restaurant or one that started a multi-billion-dollar company, that zeal for entrepreneurship dated back a couple hundred years ago, right? When the forebears who came before us had no choice, they were given no other opportunities except to invent and innovate and be entrepreneurs. So I think many of us benefit from that level of entrepreneurship, and this country has as well. So next slide. Okay, so very quickly you can see, the Chinese came, and they came to help connect the West Coast with the East Coast, as you know. But here's some really interesting facts that I did not know. I currently reside in San Francisco. I did not know that the Chinese also helped plant more than 3 million vines in Napa Valley. In fact, most historians would say Napa Valley would be set back by at least 50 years, if not for Chinese workers. In the early days, the Chinese also contributed mightily to California's agriculture until their ability to actually own land was stripped away by regulation and unfair policies. So you can see that the Chinese did not see a resurgence until World War II, and we have since seen a great surge of Chinese arriving from overseas, but also those who have been here for more than 4 or 5 generations. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about in concrete numbers, what have we done for America, right? We know that as a consumer base, we contribute more than $300 billion, 3 million jobs. Now, there's about 2 million working Chinese Americans in various professions. However, I do want to stress entrepreneurship. There's about 160,000 businesses in America that are started and owned by Chinese Americans. And out of that, we contribute $240 billion in annual GDP to America, as well as supporting 1.3 million jobs, right? This is what is really exciting because, as you all know, America thrives on entrepreneurship. And if you're really thinking about entrepreneurship, you have to think about Chinese Americans. If we look a little bit deeper into Silicon Valley, for example, most research has shown that there's about 40% of all the companies that have been started that involve the Chinese American founder or co-founder. So Chinese Americans have played an overwhelming role in entrepreneurship. Why? Because in the beginning, again, we had no choice, right? Much of the contributions we were made were despite of the discrimination and challenges. Why do I want to emphasize this? It's really because when the full potential of Chinese Americans, and by extension, other Americans are unleashed, that is really when the full potential of America could be unleashed. So that's a really important point I do want to stress over and over again. And it is a point that we really want to stress with all of our fellow Americans. All right, next slide. Okay, let's again talk about, pushing the innovation frontier. You could see that in a span about, a decade, fully 1 in every 5 high-tech startups, were run, by a Chinese immigrant. And by the way, they created, over $13 billion in sales and more than close to 50,000 jobs. If we're looking at other areas that's really germane to especially what's going on right now in the life sciences, right? We see an overwhelming number that is Chinese Americans. Now, let's talk about Fortune 500 companies. 9 of the 5 Fortune 500 companies in the decade of 2011 to 2020 were founded by Chinese Americans. Names that we all know, NVIDIA, for example, Zoom, which we use today, they're all founded by Chinese Americans. And that's one thing that we understand. It's not just to benefit our community, it's really to benefit all Americans. Next slide. Okay, now let's talk about areas that people may not know as well. Chinese Americans are not sitting idly by. In fact, we've seen in a span of a decade, significant increase in Chinese Americans being employed in the public space. It grew by almost 70%, right? And this is important because we believe that Chinese Americans are getting more engaged. They're getting more active on the political space. And we hope that with the tragedies and the injustice that's happening today, that something good will emerge out of it. And what that good is, a unity within our community, understanding that we must have our own voice heard. And then a leadership, right? A willingness to take on leadership, not just for our community, but for all Americans. Now, in terms of leaders, let's talk about, Gary Locke, Elaine Chao, and Stephen Chu, all of them, many of you have probably supported Andrew Yang in the last, presidential election cycle. But there's also somebody named Hiram Fong. He was a trailblazer, a senator from Hawaii, and he was the first Chinese American to run for the presidency of the United States because he believed that he was an American and that not only could he serve Chinese Americans, he could serve and lead all Americans. And I think it's that fundamental belief, perhaps a break from our previous generations, that will help take this community to the next level. All right, next slide. Okay, and let's talk about enriching American culture, because that for many, many generations, that anything that was not seen as Western was seen as alien, as foreign, as un-American. Yet, if you really go deeper, Chinese Americans have done our best to help enrich American culture, because we know that American culture is best when it incorporates the diversity and the variety of all of its people. Right? Whether a Maya Lin, who kind of combined nature's ingredients with salute, for example, to those who have fallen in the Vietnam War, or many of you have watched Crazy Rich Asian, which today is still the highest grossing rom-com of the last generation, of the last decade. Excuse me. Chinese Americans have really tried to infuse, our perspectives, our heritage, and our aesthetics into America, and making American culture that much richer, and I'm hoping that much inclusive, that much more inclusive. So next slide. Okay, driving public health breakthroughs. This is especially relevant because we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, right? And many of us know that this is perhaps the new normal, that variants will happen. We may likely face something like a COVID over and over again throughout our lifetime. So having the best working on helping to find solutions, helping to find preventive cures is critical. So Chinese Americans account fully for 7% of the biological and medical scientists in America, right? More than 5% of our population. And as you know, today, those of us who are in the public health space, right, use N95. In fact, the N95 mask was founded and invented by a Chinese American. And many of you know that in other areas, like for AIDS cocktail, one of our members, David Ho, was the leading inventor or designer of the cocktail that saved millions of lives. So next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, now it's good to talk about the contributions, but let's talk about the challenges, because again, we talked about how those contributions were made despite the discrimination, despite the challenges. And what are some of these challenges and discriminations? Can we go back to the previous slide, if that's okay? The first one I've alluded to was this idea that we are the perpetual foreigner, right? We are alien, we're different. In many ways, we're suspicious. Just because of the color of our skin, we are seen as potential spies, right? The second is Chinese Americans, just like many other Asian Americans, are seen as good workers, but not good leaders, right? Our research has found that Chinese Americans account for about 3% of the professionals, but only 1.2% of executive positions. Now, when we go to Fortune 500 companies on the boards, we account for less than 0.5%. This is something very, very important because we believe that Chinese Americans can not only serve as leaders, because we did some research and we found that those Fortune 500 companies that did have Chinese Americans in the C-suite, in the boardrooms, in fact, they had outperformed their peer group. And so we believe that the data has shown that when given a chance, Chinese Americans can not only serve, but also lead. And lastly, we understand that the sense of not only feeling being alienated, but the attacks and the violences must stop. And this is something which is getting more and more serious. And I think this is very important to call to everyone's attention and to realize again that we are making contributions to America despite these challenges. And when we have a chance to come together as one people, as one country, to address some of these challenges, we're in fact making America and all of America's lives better. Next slide. Okay, so key takeaways, as I said, extensive contributions across all these different sectors. Again, because of the brevity of the time, I will not be able to go into more of the details, but I highly encourage all of you to check out our microsite and then download the reports. And more importantly, share the reports, right? This is something that's really key. Many of us, including myself, did not know much of the history of who we are in this country. And the fact is, many Americans don't. And I believe that this is an important part of America's history. It makes America stronger. It makes America better when all of us learn this history. The second is, we realize that the more welcoming America is to Chinese Americans and other, immigrant groups, the better it becomes. And lastly, the very important thing is, the story of a people coming from a distant land, arriving in America, making a home here, and contributing despite the discriminations and the challenges. It's not just a Chinese American story. You could say it's a Jewish American story. It's an Irish American story. The fact is, it's an American story. And we believe that this American story should be told by our community, but hopefully it should be taught to the young people who are growing every day and helping to reshape and make America better. And hopefully through all of you, we have a chance to together tell those stories and more importantly, shape the evolution of that story. And in the process, making this a more just and more equal country for all. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Z. That was such a wonderful and necessary talk, especially in light of the horrific events in Atlanta. I learned a lot from listening to you, so thank you. Next in the agenda is an interview with distinguished philanthropist Mrs. Shirley Wang, and Mrs. Wang will be interviewed by Professor Min Zhou. Professor Zhou is going to introduce Shirley, so Min and Shirley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Z, for the very timely presentation on the contribution of Chinese Americans to American society. Here, I'm honored to have this opportunity to conduct an interview with celebrated Chinese American philanthropist, Mrs. Shirley Wang. And again, we will have the Q&A session right after my interview with Shirley. And please write down your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will select your questions for both Shirley and Z later. Shirley has accomplished a lot, and a brief introduction does not do justice, but I'll do it anyway for the interest of time. And you can read her longer bio in the conference full program. Shirley received her bachelor's degree in communications from UCLA in 1990 and has an MBA degree from Columbia University in 1993. She is the founder and CEO of PlastPro, a manufacturer of award-winning fiberglass doors. Shirley is currently a member of the Board of Trustees for Columbia University. Shirley, along with her husband, Mr. Walter Wang, has supported numerous major philanthropic initiatives, including education and research, poverty reduction, assistance for victims of domestic violence, women's mental health, anti-smoking, and AIDS prevention in the United States, China, Taiwan, and Africa, and made significant donations to schools and universities, including UCLA, Columbia, Brown, Harvard Westlake School, and Taipei American School. The Wangs have taken an active role in building a better Los Angeles through numerous initiatives and charitable community activities. For example, they have established an endowed chair at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center to further research in pediatric surgery, focusing on helping underprivileged children. They are trustees of the U.S. Olympics Committee and also serve as directors on the LA 2028 Olympic Board of Directors to bring the Olympics to Los Angeles. Last year, they donated another $1 million to the mayor's LA COVID-19 Relief Fund to provide food and assistance to low-income families and the elderly. As a UCLA alumna, Shelley and her family have donated millions of dollars to the university. Shelley and Walter have created the nation's first academic endowed chair on U.S.-China relations and communications to support Chinese-American studies at UCLA. And I have had the great honor of being the inaugural chair. They have also funded numerous scholarships and fellowships for undergraduate and graduate students and academic program at UCLA. Shelley was the first Asian American woman to lead the UCLA Foundation, a position she held from 2016 to 2018. She also served as a member of the UCLA Centennial Campaign Executive Committee, which raised $5.49 billion. And she has continued her strong advocacy and support for UCLA. Shelley and Walter Wang have both been recognized with many awards for their philanthropic works. Most notably, they were both awarded the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, a national award given to individuals who have made it their mission to share with those less fortunate for their wealth, talent, knowledge, courage, compassion, and selfless generosity. Past awardees of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor include U.S. presidents, Nobel Prize winners, industrial leaders, and the world's leading philanthropists. Good morning, Shelley, from being with us today from Taiwan. I'm honored to be in conversation with you on Chinese American philanthropy.
Thank you, Ming. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you're being very philanthropic about your nice words about Walter and I. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, Shelley, you have been one of the most recognized philanthropists in the United States and China. My question is, do you have a memory of the first philanthropic gift you made? Can you talk about that and your initial motivation for doing philanthropic work?
Well, first off, I want to sit here and say that I think philanthropy is not just about giving money, and everyone who's on this panel and everybody at UCLA who's put this symposium up is in a way a philanthropic gift for society, and I'm most generous. I mean, what you guys are doing now for Ming and Z, and especially in light of what's happening in America right now, it's truly commendable and it's truly necessary. So I thank all of you for what you are doing. And as for when I think about what is a philanthropic gift, as I said, I don't think it's just about money. I mean, in my first memory is pretty much when I was growing up, just by sharing anything that you have. We always had guests at our dinner table. I mean, literally every day I would have people that I didn't know sitting at our dinner table at my house. And my grandmother would say, it's just an extra pair of chopsticks. It's just that she was always inviting people over, and people who didn't have food or who are friends. And even bring my husband's family into it. I mean, and what he also says, in Taiwanese, as you know, China and Taiwan, all these countries were in war torn. And many people didn't have food. And you know how Taiwanese people say, how are you? It's not how are you, it's jababe, it's have you eaten? And by saying that is because people didn't have food, and yet, by saying that, they would invite, if you said you were hungry then, or you didn't eat, they would invite you over. That is the way the culture is. So I think in Chinese culture, it's always sharing what you have. And that, I think, is the first philanthropic gift that anybody can give.
Thank you. And when you make a philanthropic gift, what is the process you follow through to reach a decision to give? Is that a family decision? Do your children also participate in the discussion?
I mean, I think it's basically all kinds of, it comes through many ways. I mean, when I was thinking about what philanthropic gift to give, it comes, so many people come to me and ask me what to give, right? I mean, I get lots of letters, I get asked a lot. And at one point in my life, I said, God, why don't you tell me, what is your top 10, gift that you want us to give? And I'll do it, And I think God gave me a wonderful answer, which is that, everyone has unique life experiences. I mean, to develop their empathies, to develop their opportunities. For example, recently, as you mentioned, we just gave to TAS, which is Taipei American School, and the lower school was named after us. And many people asked us, why did we donate? And I would have to say, I don't know, I don't think it's about fame or influence, or I had a great time at TAS. My kids don't go to the school. And when I was there, I felt like I was actually bullied. I had no friends for 10 years. I had to, no one would sit with me during lunchtime and eat in the library. But because of that, because I felt like a little bit bullied, through my donation, we brought Facing History in Ourselves, a curriculum on bullying, victim, the bystander, and the upstander, and we brought it to TAS. And I felt we had to give that to TAS because TAS is an important institution in Taiwan, and it was training the future generations to for Taiwan and Chinese American, Chinese kids there, and to develop empathy. So, I mean, I realized that God has a lot to do on this earth, and there's at least 7 billion things on this earth to do. So, with each and every one of us. So that's why each and of us develop empathy for certain things to give to. And I think that's where when it comes to thought, is that every person has an empathy or something experience that creates that empathy for them to do something. And
yeah, go ahead.
No, and then when you're talking about is the family's decision, or I mean, back to the same thing. It's back to empathy. It's back to relationships. It's back to opportunities. But the same thing I tell my kids is that in order for them to donate or to do philanthropy, I would want them to actually work first to know the value of money, and to see how hard it is to earn and what it means to make an impact. So I ask them to work first before they start giving, and to understand what is cost and what makes impact.
Thank you. Now, my other question, I have a few other questions. So just now I mentioned in my journal special issue launch that Chinese Americans and diasporic Chinese have historically been generous in making gifts to help the poor, the less fortunate, and the needy, as you mentioned about your grandmother's story and whatnot. And so giving has been a long-standing tradition in the Chinese culture, but their contribution are not that well known. And there is also a misperception that Chinese people are not philanthropic. What do you think about the origin of this perception, and what can we do to change that?
You know, a lot of people have approached me to say that, you know, Chinese people aren't philanthropic, but I actually don't think that is true, because I think China has been war torn for the last 200 years or something. So I don't think they had, you know, every person had a lot of money to give to the world at large. And if anything, I think it's, in a way, you know, Chinese people are rooted in Confucianism. And in that is that you have to help yourself, and then you help your family, and then you help your community, and then you help your country. So I think during the past 200 years, Chinese people were just trying to help themselves. They're trying to make sure that they could feed themselves, they could feed, you know, their family, and so on. So I don't think it's because they weren't philanthropic. It's because they weren't capable of it yet. They wanted to stand up first before they could help others. And then why it's not very known is another thing, is because Zhujiao or Confucianism is you have to be humble. I mean, even right now, when I say that I donated this, I feel I cringe a little bit. Should I be saying that? Is that that's not very humble? And so I think it's based in the Chinese culture to not say what the good deeds that you do. But I guess your question is another, is to why what we can do to change that, is that I think, you know, Chinese people have to come out and say what they do, or the philanthropy that they do, because I mean, I think it inspires other people, and then, you know, not to promote themselves, but inspire other people to give, and other Chinese people, and say, oh, I can do that, I can say that, and it makes a difference. So I think slowly, like this symposium and this research that you guys will be doing, it'll inspire other people to do more philanthropic work, or not just inspire for them to do it, but to also promote it, or to say that they did something.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. And we have to speak up, and also we have to promote the awareness of our contribution to society. And also, as you mentioned just now, it's not about giving money, but also working, contributing. And Z has made you know, the community of 100 has made a great report on the contribution of Chinese Americans to American society. And you and Walter are certainly admirable while humble, you know, trying to make the world a better place with your contribution. Thank you. My next question is, now, just now I mentioned promoting knowledge and understanding of Chinese and Chinese Americans, and is a main mission of our Global Chinese Philanthropy Initiative, our GCPI initiative. And a recent study of the GCPI finds that there is an exponential growth in Chinese and Chinese philanthropy, Chinese American philanthropy, both in the US and China during the past decade. So the growth is like more than 400%. What do you think has driven this growth? Are there any structural or cultural differences that you encounter when making gifts in China or Taiwan or the United States? Is there any difference in giving?
Yes, I mean, I think ultimately it's policy and taxes, and how philanthropy is counted in all these countries. I mean, I think in the United States, it promotes philanthropy. So of course, everyone knows if you give to philanthropy, you get 40% deduction, and I think in Taiwan or China, I think, you know, it needs to have better policies and regulations for it. I mean, I have to say in Taiwan, you know, every time we give here, they have to disperse the money within to small chunks. 10% of what you give into the foundation has to give to 10% to each of these smaller charities, and it's harder to make impact. So I think at the end of the day, what you guys are doing is very important to disseminate to all the world on how they can structure their policies and rules or tax, how they count as taxes and things like that to promote more philanthropy. Because, I mean, I think the government can do a lot of good, but I think philanthropy can also promote a lot of good and beyond what the government can do. And so with your research, maybe, you can show how all these different countries use their tax policies to promote philanthropy and make it impactful, I would say.
Yes, I realized that when I was working in Singapore, Singapore has a very generous government policy to promote philanthropy. Say, if you donate to a cause, if you donate to a nonprofit or education, the government would match 100% of your gift, and sometimes they match even 150%. So that stimulates not only the tax benefit but also the incentive to stimulate philanthropy and giving, right? So affecting policy making is very important. Yeah. My next question is, so you like all other donors, you are pulled in many directions and with a lot of different causes demanding attention. So from your experience, do you give with a preconceived understanding of the cause you want to give to? Like, for example, today, in the time of COVID-19, how would a nonprofit organization, say, such as Asian American Advancing Justice in Los Angeles and also currently Stop AAPI Hate, to make the case? How would these organizations to make a case to you that an investment in its social justice mission is just as impactful as one in, say, vaccine or mental health research?
Well, back to my same story, I think they all sound good. I mean, even saving the dolphins can sound good. But the thing is, I would say that it's based on a person's life experiences, empathies, relationships and opportunities. I mean, right now, what AAPI is doing is very critical and what's prevalent on everybody's minds. When COVID started, it was prevalent on everybody's minds at that time. So it's timing, it's relationships on who like, were you approached, or you just felt like it was easy to donate to, or you felt it was impactful. So it comes all in all different forms. But then at the same time, I would tell all development officers, that it is important to go ask. I mean, I'm going to tell you a story that I just recently had with Andrew Trin from Panda Express. I mean, before, they would give out, there's a little box next to the cashier and you put coins in, like the extra change to donate to whatever they have. And before that, I think they raised $2 million through that. But over like 10 years, by bringing their employees to the philanthropy that they promoted, their cashiers were asked, would you like to donate to this philanthropy or this charity? And through that, in over 10 years, 1 year, they became $50 million because the cashier asked. So therefore, I think it's important that people continue to ask, and it's important what development officers do is, to create the opportunity for someone to give.
Thank you. That actually comes to my next question about, what nonprofit organizations and development offices on fundraising have to do, because you have been approached by many of those organizations and also university development offices. So what has been your experience working with these professionals? And are there any suggestions or cultural nuances that you want to share that you think is important for them to understand when working with Chinese and Chinese American philanthropies?
Ultimately, I think it's sincerity. I mean, you have to have passion for what you're promoting. I mean, just like the Panda Express story. I mean, the cashiers went to see the charity, they can see the good work that's been done. So I would say sincerity of what you're promoting, authenticity. I mean, nobody wants to just be approached by just a sales job and get the deal done and just ka-ching and say, okay, I got this one done. It's to really care about the charity and even care about the the donor. I mean, care about the person, about look in their shoes on why they want to donate and what's impactful for them. And I think another thing is transparency, honest about the procedures and the needs. Sometimes there will be hiccups, but to be honest about it and say, oh, we this is what we're facing and this is the problem that we have. Can you help? Or this, could you be patient with us? I mean, these are just basic human values that I think it's truly important.
Thank you. Now, my last question. We are an academic partner of the GCPI and would like to promote and stimulate scholarly research on global Chinese philanthropy. And this is the main goal of the conference as well. So what do you think are some of the most urgent issues for research in this area? And what would be your advice for us scholars interested in this line of research?
I would probably, it's important because as Z says, as you said, it's grown tremendously. And I think it's important to study how much has been given, how much has given Chinese globally in each country, and what are the tax policies in each country, what's the incentives to give, and who gives, a database, motivations for giving, find out what makes an impact, what to look for, for Chinese, other people, for the donors too. So like what makes it, what to look for, what are the administration costs, how to verify the impact, and maybe guideline for impactful giving. The structure, what is also how to give well. I mean, what are the best practices? Those are good for both, the charity and for the donors. And to see, where is giving, most impactful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I think Chinese philanthropy will continue to grow and will be a major factor. And so diverting resources where the government can't go or haven't gone yet, it will be really important for this research.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your support and encouragement. We will, this is the kind of research we are passionately pursuing. And there are a lot of people in China, Southeast Asia, the hub of the Chinese diaspora and the US. So as an academic field, this is still kind of a small, very much understudied field. So we want to, through our effort, we want to promote it and with your support. And thank you so much. And now I think I am going to open the floor for the audience. There are quite a lot of questions written there. So again, welcome everybody to the International Symposium for Global Chinese Philanthropy. And we hear the president of Committee 100's Z Huang's presentation on the contribution of Chinese Americans to American society, as well as my interview with distinguished Chinese American philanthropist, Ms. Shelley Wang. So now we are, our floor is open for questions, and please write down your questions in the Q&A box, and I will select your question. And the question is both for Shelley and Z. So here is one question. From what parts of Asian Chinese Taoist or Confucianist cultural concepts of altruism or interdependence can 21st century social science and philanthropy studies learn?
Should I take it? Okay. So
sure.
I don't know if it's Confucianism or the culture. I mean, I have a back. I would say that my family is Chinese, so they kind of understand Confucianism. But I would say that people give in Buddhism, right? I mean, people give to do good and then reincarnate better, right? Or have good karma, right? If you do good things will happen to you. I think in Christianity, you're thankful for the gospel, you do good so that you serve God's purpose. You do it out of gratefulness. And I think Confucian is your responsibility to do good and to help society. So I think it comes all together. Ultimately, it's all altruistic values. But I can see there's slight differences in everything, but maybe studying it even more detail would be good. But at the end of the day, it is the ultimate human value.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Z, you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Shirley says. Everybody knows that as you study Taoism, you realize that that's one of the philosophies that's closest to nature, right? As Lao Tzu said, be like water. And the fact is, climate change and being in harmony with nature and with our environment is probably one of the most critical areas for attention and philanthropy. Now, if we come back to Confucianism, it's basically 修身齐家平天下, right? It's really about self-cultivation, about bringing harmony to the family as the core unit, and ultimately contributing, right, to good governance. Now, the highest form of Confucianism, as we know, is 君子. And what is 君子? Is someone who could have mastery over himself, but also gives to others. And now let's come back for a second, which is in every culture, there are these elements because we live in a society in every culture. And I think the key for us as Chinese Americans is to remember those best attributes of what makes our culture special, and then to apply it to today's society. Now, I'm going to expand on that just a little bit because in our report, we actually did some studies on philanthropy, focusing on Chinese Americans. And we realized that traditionally, Chinese Americans' philanthropy have centered in two areas. One was community support, because we knew, again, because of the discrimination and challenges, when the earliest immigrants came to America, they had nobody else to help, right, except themselves. So you saw a lot of tongues, right? They formed because of the ethnicity, the regional centricity of the immigrants, and they banded together. So we saw philanthropy there because they knew that they had to help each other because no one else was going to help us. Now we saw in extension of that, and I think Shirley is the perfect example, which is tremendous philanthropy in education. Now, why are Chinese Americans so interested in education? A lot of scholars believe it's because the Chinese have a long tradition of honoring education as a path of achieving not just success, but achieving harmony with all others. And more importantly, in America, as you know, there is possible through hard work and education to not only make it, but to give back. So we saw and we continue to see tremendous amount of philanthropy by Chinese Americans giving back, especially in education. Now we do see a third wave now, which is giving back beyond our own community, beyond education, to across communities and across society. Now, climate change, et cetera, is a perfect example. It goes back to our Taoist ethos, but also we're beginning to see, Chinese Americans giving back to all of America. So I'll give you a concrete example. Last year, Committee of 100, individually and collectively, through great members like Shirley and others, we gave out about $11 million through various donations, not just to Chinese Americans or Asian Americans, but to all Americans. In fact, C100 itself gave out about $4 million of PPE donations to about 120 hospitals, primarily to African American and Latino communities, because we know that those communities were the hardest hit. And we know that the pandemic, it knows no color, right? It knows no boundaries. And in this fight, we are together. We are one people. And as such, it is incumbent on us to show that as Americans, we care for all other Americans. So that's something that I'm very excited about. Shirley and others have taken really a leadership on, which is to expand that feeling of us to across this country, to across this world, and really help make this country and make this world that much better.
I mean, right now I see a question on the question and answer. Someone's asking if I donate as a Chinese or Chinese American or a global citizen. Ultimately, I don't see myself. Do you see yourself as one part or another? I don't think any of us do. I think ultimately is being a person, right? I mean, my husband Walter, I mean, he donated, 800 miles of pipe to Africa, which gives 500,000 people water, right? So, I mean, ultimately, is to give as a person, because people are in need and we are all the same. And back to the same thing we're dealing with now with Asian hate. I mean, we're all people. We are all, trying to live on this earth and try to make the world a little bit better.
Thank you. Yeah, let me recap 3 points that Shelley and Z make very, uh, uh, very succinctly and significantly. One is Chinese has historically and traditionally be giving and generous and helping, giving to help the poor, help the needy, and also help each other, especially under the era of Chinese exclusion and also under the situation of adversity, both in China and in the Chinese diaspora. They help each other through the family associations, hometown organizations, and community organizations. So secondly, and also the Chinese very much focus on giving to education. And your research, C, has found, and our research has also found that Chinese and Chinese American philanthropies have like 60% of their donations is on higher education and research. So very heavily on education. And so that they are giving, there is a trend that they are giving as individual. They are not giving as Chinese or Chinese Americans. They are giving beyond their own family, beyond their own ethnic community, beyond their own, kind of diasporic community, and reach out to other communities and just to make the world better. Thank you. Right, and there is a question about the Confucius entrepreneurs. That question, actually, we ran a conference last November, and I'm working on 2 journal special issue on global Chinese entrepreneurship. And a lot of Chinese American philanthropies and diasporic Chinese philanthropies, they are entrepreneurs themselves. So the question is about Confucius entrepreneurs. So Confucius entrepreneurship and also Chinese philanthropy, they are intrinsically connected. So what do you think about the connection between Confucius entrepreneur and Confucius Chinese or Chinese American or diasporic Chinese philanthropy? Do you agree that the two are connected?
I guess it's pretty much culture, right? Culture that, you help. I mean, I'm not a Confucius expert, but what I do know as a Chinese person about, how the culture is to you help yourself, you help others, and you continue to do that. I guess, and you have to make sure that you can stand up yourself and then help others. I guess that's Confucianism.
Yeah, this is actually a really good question because it brings up 2 very interesting points. One is traditionally people have thought, especially in the last couple hundred years, that Confucianism was about tradition, that it was incompatible with modernization. Right? In fact, we saw movements within China to go against Confucian because it stood for everything that was feudal. But if you look at the life of Confucius and you look at the evolution of Confucianism, you see that there's actually within it. In fact, Confucianism at its best was not prescribing a set of rules, but more about how to establish relationships that are harmonious, that can withstand challenges and times. And that's why you could see that the longevity of the Chinese culture, the ability to weather wars and famines and diseases, was because of this ability, that this elasticity that is provided by that culture. So I do think that's a really interesting point about entrepreneurship innovation within tradition. So that's one. The second, philanthropy. Let's be honest. A criticism that's been given about Chinese and Confucian culture is about its focus on the self, right, and by extension the family, but not really about the community. And I think if you think about how Confucius saw it, it was really concentric circles. You kind of have to first take care of yourself. You kind of have to take care of your family, but by extension, you want to share that love, right? Percolating out, concentric circle by concentric circle. So I think at its best, it's really, again, a way of showing philanthropy in a very sustainable way. Now, of course, again, anything at its worst could be distorted and mutilated and transformed. So I think what I really want to stress, and I think this is the core of this question, and I think of your research and exploration, is how do we continually adapt the best in our tradition and to evolve to meet challenges of today. In fact, China of today is not the China of 2,000, 4,000 years ago, right? China has always prided itself to absorb interesting phenomena from the West, from the East, from different parts. And that's also what makes America very special, the diversity that makes America unique and inclusive and I think very, very productive. And I think that's something that all of us, especially as Chinese Americans, when we sit at the intersection of the West and East, I think that's something that uniquely we can bring to the table. When Shirley speaks, people go, oh yeah, she understands America, she is American, but she also understands Asia in a very profound way, right? I think it's that intersection of ideas that really makes these discourses and perhaps your research and the discussions to come that much fascinating and enriching.
Thank you. Shelley, you have things to add to that? I think you told me a lot of stories in our conversations that sheds light to what Z has to say about, Confucianism not being just the old tradition or feudal stuff.
Yeah, as Z said, I mean, it's really, and what I try to teach my kids is that we have to learn how to stand up ourselves. I want them to work, to understand what is the value of money, and then to also see, to help beyond themselves, not just for themselves, but for the world, because that's the only way we can get better, not just for ourselves, but for the world. And I can see people are asking, how do we let more people contribute is I think to also promote it. Just what you guys are doing right now with GCPI is to say, hey, show others that we do give and that it makes a difference. And it's not, a part of being humble and you don't say it, but to say it will inspire others to give. And I think what you are doing for with your research and all the scholars that are on this conference, I mean, it will help and inspire others to give. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so to promote our contribution, as you said, Shelley, that the Chinese Americans or Chinese people are humble. They don't want to, highlight their contribution and whatnot, and yet we have to do it. I guess we scholars can play a role in that, and also like Z's organization also can play a role in that, highlighting the contributions of both our work as well as our donations. So there is a question asking about what can we do to promote? Are there any specific ways to promote this awareness and visibility of the Chinese American contributions? Like Z, you just produced this fabulous report. How are you going to promote it besides, giving webinars and seminars? That is very effective, but are there any other ways?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ming. I think we have a four-pronged approach or 4 phases. The first is to really share within our own community. As you know, you were one of the groups that was gracious enough to conduct a bird talk with us, right? And we have done it for about 80 organizations now. But the first thing is we as a community need to know our own history, right? A people without a history, loses a sense of who they are. And so we need to regain a sense of who we are in this country. So that's one. The second is we need to share this broadly, right, with the Asian American community and with our other ethnic communities, because again, this is part of American history. This is not just our own history, this is American history. The third is we have to make sure that this is actually part of a curriculum. Because I when I took American history class, maybe there was one paragraph on the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that's it, right? That's it. And so I think we can do a lot more. Again, all going to one textbook. If people are interested, they should have the opportunity in schools, in the libraries to learn about this, right? So that's third. And the fourth is, as our key policymakers make decisions, they should understand the ramifications that it has on Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, right? So having them educated is very, very important, right? Having some of our media organizations understand that what they write matters, right? Just like when our political leaders speak, it matters, right? We have to educate them so that they can speak, accurately and also in the interest of America.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like I tell all my friends and family, I mean, in Chinese, there's a culture, something like 大事化成小事化成无, which basically means, a big thing. If there's a big problem, you try to make it a small problem. And if it's a small problem, you make it into nothing, right? But I think that has to, in a way, change in America. I think, we have to speak up. If there's a problem, we need to speak up, just like this things that are happening with Asian hate right now. I mean, we have to speak up and say, hey, stop, this needs to stop. And doing what John Long has done with this, philanthropy, global philanthropy symposium and conference is, we have to promote it and we have to say what we have done and what Z is doing with Committee of 100 is to speak about the history. And we have to talk to the media. We have to talk to the political leaders that, hey, things are happening and what we have done and also what should not be done. So I think this is the part of, I guess, back to Confucianism, that we have to promote ourselves and speak out what is a problem and what is also good.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Now there is a question, I just read it out. I want to know whether there is any research or facts gathered on non-monetary philanthropic incidents or acts. I'm asking this question because my family is benefited by a philanthropic act of the late Cardinal Paul Yu Bin, who arranged many thousands of Chinese students and churchgoers to study abroad and to engage their professional works overseas to promote cultural and educational exchange. Cardinal Yu was very famous in both China and the Western world. He was also the university president of Furen University in Taiwan. So can you give some thoughts about or insights about non-monetary philanthropic acts?
Yeah, I mean, I sit here and say, when I started, is that it's not just monetary that's really philanthropic. I mean, to be honest with you, the person who allowed me to sit next to them during the lunch table, I remember that act more impactful than somebody who gave me some money, So, I mean, things that when a person's in need and someone really helps you out, that is what you really remember. And so I think, everyone has the opportunity to give, not just the people who have money, but the opportunity to, have a smile for someone who's having a really bad day, to allowing a cup of water, give them a cup of water when they're thirsty, or just doing things like what you are doing right here is contributing and telling what people are doing that's good. Everything can be philanthropic. And I do think, as the person says, we should count those things. You can't count some things that are more important that can't be counted in monetary terms are sometimes more important.
Thank you. Z, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just really want to echo Shirley's point about speaking up for two key reasons. One is we live in a democracy, and democracy is a contentious, messy system, right? And democracy has been around, for centuries in the Greco-Roman time. So this is not new to us. And in a democracy, if you don't speak up, you have no voice. I remember very clearly a congressman from Texas who told me, look, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Right? So it's very incumbent for us to really speak up. And you speak up by getting involved. How do you get involved? You give your time, you give your energy, you give your attention, you give your talents. If you don't make that commitment, you're not going to get what you want to get. So that's one. The second is, I do think there's a popular misconception about Confucianism and Taoism, which is about this idea that, we should step back, kind of like what Shirley said, right? 大事化小，小事化无, right? Step back, take it easy, let things blow over. I actually think as you read into it, you realize even if, Lao Tzu said, be like water, water doesn't yield, right? Water may move this way or that way, but water given time penetrates through stones. Water is the most effective force in nature, right? That's what we should be. We do not yield. We continue to do what's right. So that's one. And then the second is, Confucianism, especially if you think about some of the symbols, like a bamboo, right? The wind may blow the bamboo shoots this way or that way, but it never bends. It never breaks because it has core values that drives it forth, right? So those are, I think, really the key ethos of our tradition. And I think we should be very mindful. Now, we speak with a nice, we speak with a good voice, right? We may not shout and scream as others, but we speak firmly, right? We speak, I think, with righteousness and with justice on our side and with compassion in our heart. And I think that's something that really brings out the best of our tradition. And hopefully, again, it is my true belief that America will benefit profoundly from that tradition.
Thank you. Yeah, with that, I would like to close. So like Z said, we are water. Water is powerful, and we are bamboo. Bamboo never bend. And Shelley and Z encourage us to speak up and to fight for social justice and speak out of what we think, to have a voice in this American democracy. And so thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you so much, Z, for your time to this great panel. And time is up and I have to end this panel. And thank you so much for coming, and hope you will stay on this evening's session and tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our first panel. I want to echo Min in once again thanking Zi Huang and Shirley Wang for their truly thoughtful and empathetic remarks, which are just so needed these days. We're going to take a 15-minute break before we begin our next panel at 5:45 p.m. Pacific time. Please use the same Zoom link for the next session. That Zoom link can also be used for all of the sessions that will be taking place tomorrow. So thank you again to all of our wonderful presenters and to all of our attendees, and we will see you after a short break.
Thank you.